Engaging executives effectively is one of the most difficult things in tech sales. Whether it's at a small company where it's a really fast growing startup, the CTO has a million different things going on and it's hard to buy their time, or conversely, at a really large company, it's difficult to even get in front of the relevant leadership in the first place. I've recently had to really put attention to how I'm engaging executives effectively to continue a deal, etc. And I wanted to break down a few of the different approaches that I have found successful throughout my career, both with small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as large companies that are very difficult to even get in front of in the first place. So let's take the case that you're working with a very fast-growing startup, maybe a CTO that is more accessible than a very, very large company, but by extension has a million fires to put out at any given time, so it's very difficult to grab their attention and communicate the value. One of the most difficult things that I see reps struggle to do is communicate effectively, where if you're on a 30-minute to a 60-minute discovery call with a developer, maybe you sketch in 30 minutes with the CTO on the phone, and you're taking that same pace or that same approach and the same level of detail where the CTO really needs to quickly see the value and assess if it's worth it for them. Now again, I'm not saying you sit there and in 5 to 10 minutes say, hey, here's what we do you want to sign today? But again, if you're sitting there with a developer and you're talking about lower level features of a software product, if the CTO's on the phone, it's a waste of his or her time because that is the stuff that they have hired developers to do for them. If you're not aligning on the highest levels of value from their perspective, it's very difficult for them to buy in and trust and offload the work to the lower level team to actually implement and test further. Even with a technical persona like a CTO, I'd also mention you shouldn't shy away from price. Sure, the CTO is probably going to say, hey, right now the CEO or the CFO ultimately signs off on all that stuff. They really don't care. I've kind of had a mix where some CTOs are super hardcore technical and they really don't care about price. They just want the coolest toys. They just want the best performing products for them to use and have at their disposal. But candidly, you have to force that conversation where, again, you can get the technical leadership bought in, but if you're getting up to the CFO, the CEO, and they're coming in on this deal, even though the CTO's 100% thumbs up, if they see a 2x, a 3x increase in cost, they're going to be completely left out of the blue. So as an example, maybe you engage the CTO, it's on you to force that conversation around cost. Maybe they're all about what you're doing from a technical standpoint, but if they're really not one to say, hey, our CFO signs off, our CEO signs off, I'm not really worried about price, this tool works for me, it has my thumbs up. Just be like, hey, CTO, totally understand your perspective. I will say one of the things we've seen, given this is going to be an increase in cost, I've worked with teams that have tried our product for a month or two. They're all about it, and it gets ultimately shut down and wastes everyone's time altogether. Is that a conversation we can have with the CEO or CFO or whoever is signing off on this just to make sure we're aligned? And if we're successful with the testing of this product, we're ready to move forward. You're doing everyone a favor and you're making sure you're getting the critical executives in line. And again, the reason you're asking in that first place is not to hey, I want to make a sale. You set it up as hey, I know you're busy. Thank you for joining in the first place. By the way, I've seen this before where I've worked with other teams for a month and a half, 2 months, and everything worked great, and the CEO could not justify or stomach a 2x increase in cost on this product, even though there was immense value. These are the kinds of ways you can really make a point to make sure you're getting in front of the executive's time, and the way that you do that, again, is making it clear that it's worth everyone's time if they do that. So if you're keeping that frame, hey, I want to make this as frictionless as possible. I've given you all the information you need from a technical standpoint. I appreciate your support. I appreciate your time. We need to make sure that we're not going to get a month down the line and everyone shut it down because of the cost, because of the sticker price of 2x or 3x what you're paying now, even though the value is there. As we look at larger and larger accounts, it's difficult to even get in front of leadership in the first place. And this is where it gets even more difficult because especially if you're working with an individual developer or maybe even a mid-level manager, they might be offended if you go over their head and just ask or ping an executive directly. It shows them that you don't value their authority or their ability to drive a deal within the company. And also, if the executive has not been briefed on this, maybe they talk to that person and they're like, hey, I was handling it. I wanted to wait until I tested X, Y, and Z, before I presented this to you to save your time. It's just, there's so much more downside than upside if you're engaging an executive very early against the approval of a mid-level manager, an individual developer, etc. Now, there's always exceptions. If you have been having multiple conversations with a developer and it's largely going nowhere, they haven't been able to introduce you to anyone up the chain, at that point, you need to ask them more directly or candidly just go above them and see if you can't get leadership involved. Talking more strategically about how this plays out in an actual interaction. Maybe you're at a Fortune 500 company trying to break in with a software product. You talk to a few developers on their team. They see a little bit of fit in what they're doing and they want to spin up your product and start testing. While sometimes it will work to get the product and get them to see value quickly and you want that, there's two ways you can go about it in my mind, which is one, making sure and asking before they even spin up the product, hey, as we get involved, as you see value, I know a lot of times, as an example, there's other teams or executives that want to see the value in the product itself. So as we spin up, as we get you going, what other team members would want to be involved? Conversely, another strategy I've seen is a mutual action plan or a POV plan, depending on how you may phrase it, but where you're saying, hey, there's value to be had here. You agree that this is something you want to test. What we should do now is set out both a path for your technical success criteria. So if you test this, and it's successful, we'd move forward with a purchase. But I will tell you, having gone through and worked with other enterprises like yourself, we know that procurement, legal, budgeting, approvals, etc. is going to take a long time. So in conjunction with all of these technical milestones that we've set out in your testing, what I'd like to do in parallel is as we hit that first milestone, we get all of our legal situations squared away. So if they need to redline anything, we're all good there. Second, as we hit that second milestone, what I'd like to do is provide an initial proposal that I can put in front of you and your team. And if they agree to that by extension, like just for my knowledge, who would be the point of contact that wants that proposal in the first place? And again, these are examples of how you can do it, but you need to give and take. You can't just give a developer access to your software and expect them to get them to work it up and get a $100,000 plus deal signed off. That's just not going to happen. But conversely, you have to be tactical, and if someone is really going to bat for you, they're really testing your product, you have to earn the trust and rapport to ask them directly who should be brought in. If they were being defiant and saying, oh no, don't worry about it, I'll test it, and once I see what I need to see, then I'll get leadership to sign off. Candidly, they're not going to be the point of contact that takes you to the promised land. And at that point, it may be worth going and trying to get other people involved. But on you as a rep, again, trying to focus on what you can control as early as possible when you've identified value and when you have shown a prospect that you can clearly make their lives easier, provide immense monetary return on investment, whatever it might be. You need to, as a rep, very calmly ask direct questions about who needs to be involved. And it's not coming from the place of like, hey, I know you can't sign this and I know you can't ultimately be the one who, gives away $250,000 to buy this product. It's from the perspective of, hey, I appreciate your enthusiasm and I'm glad we've made this much progress thus far. Candidly, I've worked with other folks where we've gone 2 to 3 months down the line, and because a product manager wasn't involved, because the financial approver, whether it's the CFO or otherwise, was not involved, because the executive VP of engineering was not involved, whoever that may be, when we ultimately got to the time where we needed to move forward with the product, it gets to that level for an ultimate sign-off, and because they're seeing it for the first time, because they're seeing a slight increase in cost, they shoot it down, and all the work that you've just done is now pointless. So if you don't mind me asking, who would need to be involved and who can we get visibility on this to make sure that we're aligned every step of the way before ultimately signing off if this is successful? Lastly, I do want to mention an approach I saw from Gong, and credit to them, this was a pretty good approach I've started to incorporate myself. If you've had a couple conversations at a very, very large organization and it's difficult to get through to leadership, your individual contact doesn't want to give you that information, or in the case where maybe very early on, if there's a strategic initiative at a very large company, what may happen is you get a bunch of directors on that first entry level call, and then if they give the thumbs up, hey, we want to test this, they usually offload that to developers, and what can happen over time is you lose line of sight or visibility to those executives. One of the things that I've started to incorporate a lot is make sure, obviously, to add them on LinkedIn, follow up with an email initially from our first call, thanking them for their time, giving them my contact information, asking if there's any follow-up questions. Usually there's not. It's not worth their time, and they're offloading that to their team to engage. But what happens is if you have a POV or your software tool takes maybe a month, 2, 3 months to test, over time, those executives get busy with other initiatives, with other projects, and they forget about that evaluation. It's very painful for them to go back. Now they have to have a meeting with their developers and see what they've done over the last 2 to 3 months. Now they realize they haven't been as close to it as they want, and their priorities have changed. They've lost, they don't really even care as much about this deal anymore, this product that they want to bring in, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things I've started to incorporate, obviously, the second that an executive attends, you're adding on LinkedIn, you're following up with email with great information like recapping, asking if there's any questions, letting them know you're available for questions. But even when they're not attending future meetings, if you have a call with a team of developers a week later and that executive is not on the call, send them a follow-up email, something of the effect of a subject line that's like, no action needed, call summary from today. And you provide a quick summary. Hey, I know you were on our first call, wanted to update you of what happened this week when we spoke with your team further. Here's what we did. If you have any questions, let me know. What you're doing, again, I wouldn't even necessarily expect a response. You may even have an executive that says, hey, thanks for this email, but I don't need to be involved at this level, but at least now you know. And now you can call them, and now Maybe if you do send them another email, you can say, hey, I know you mentioned you don't want frequent updates. The reason I'm emailing you is because we had a very large update that I thought you should be aware of. These are the ways you can build rapport. These are the ways you can keep your product top of mind to the ultimate people who need to sign off and actually keep a deal moving, especially as you go to larger and larger companies. Again, I'm never going to be one to say this is the exact strategy you should use. When it comes to interacting with smaller businesses, a lot of the mistakes I see are reps that are having developer level conversations with CTOs who have a million things going on and could care less about the lower level details, and they want to see that value very quickly. On the flip side, as we go to larger and larger companies, it's very difficult to get in front of those people in the first place. And once you do, you're not keeping enough contact, you're not engaging them enough to keep them involved with the millions of different priorities they have. They're managing teams of 100, 200, 300 plus people. They can't care or they can't attend every single meeting. So it's on you to be very persistent and consistent and provide value with every interaction you have. But that hopefully will put you in a better position come time to sign a deal, come time to move a deal over the edge and actually sell your solution. So I hope that helps. Have a great week.